Sometimes the smallest mistake can change your life forever. Emily Carter had already driven 3 blocks away from the office when a sudden feeling hit her stomach like a dropped stone. Her laptop. She gripped the steering wheel tighter as her heart began to race. The company laptop was still sitting on her desk. For a second, she hoped she was wrong. Maybe she had packed it without thinking. Maybe it was on the passenger seat. At the next red light, she glanced over. Nothing. The seat was empty except for Sophie's purple backpack. Emily closed her eyes for a moment and sighed. It had been one of those days. The kind that seemed determined to test every ounce of patience a person had left. Her alarm had failed that morning. Sophie had missed the school bus. Traffic had stretched a 20-minute commute into nearly an hour. Then 3 unexpected meetings had been added to her schedule before lunch. By 5 o'clock, all she wanted was to pick up her 8-year-old daughter, get home, and forget the day ever happened. Unfortunately, life rarely followed plans. "Mom, are you okay?" Sophie asked softly from the back seat. Emily forced a smile into the rearview mirror. "I'm okay, sweetheart." "You made that face." "What face?" Sophie grinned. "The worried face." Emily laughed despite herself. "Kids noticed everything. I forgot something at work." "Something important?" Emily hesitated. "Very important." Sophie nodded seriously as if discussing a national emergency. "Then we should go get it." If only it were that simple. Emily glanced at the dashboard clock. It was already past 7. The office building would be locked soon. Even if she made it back, she still had groceries to buy and dinner to prepare. She mentally calculated the remaining balance in her checking account while driving through evening traffic. Every dollar mattered. Every hour mattered. Every decision mattered. Being a single mother meant there was no backup plan waiting at home. No one else to pick up the slack when life became overwhelming. It was all on her. By the time they reached their apartment complex, the sun had disappeared behind the skyline. Emily carried grocery bags in one hand and Sophie's backpack in the other while climbing 2 flights of stairs. The small apartment wasn't fancy, but it was warm, clean, and filled with the little signs of a life built through determination rather than luck. After dinner, Emily tried calling the office security desk. No answer. She checked her email on her phone and felt her anxiety grow. The laptop contained tomorrow's presentation files. Weeks of work were stored there. Missing that meeting could damage everything she had worked so hard to build. Around 9 o'clock, after Sophie had changed into pajamas and settled at the kitchen table with a coloring book, Emily stood by the window staring into the darkness outside. She was already planning how early she would need to wake up when a sudden knock echoed through the apartment. One knock, then another. Emily frowned. Nobody visited this late. She walked toward the door, completely unaware that the next few seconds were about to change her life. Emily hesitated for a moment before reaching for the doorknob. At 9 o'clock at night, unexpected visitors usually meant unexpected problems. She opened the door slowly and immediately froze. Standing in the hallway was Ethan Brooks. For a second, her brain refused to process what she was seeing. Ethan Brooks was not just another manager from the office. He was the founder and chief executive officer of Brooks Technologies, a company worth billions of dollars. His face appeared in business magazines. He spoke at national conferences. Hundreds of employees worked under his leadership. Yet somehow he was standing outside her apartment, holding a black laptop case. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Emily was too shocked to find words. Ethan finally lifted the case slightly. "I believe this belongs to you." Emily stared at it. "My laptop. You left it on your desk. You brought it here?" A faint smile crossed his face. That was the idea. Emily could hardly believe what she was hearing. "You did not have to do that." "Probably not. You could have asked security." "I could have. Or one of your assistants." "That is also true." Emily blinked. The situation felt completely unreal. Before she could say anything else, a small voice called from inside the apartment. "Mom." Sophie appeared around the corner wearing pink pajamas and fuzzy socks. She stopped when she saw a stranger standing at the door. Ethan immediately lowered himself slightly to her eye level. "Hi there." Sophie looked at him curiously. "Are you the laptop guy?" Emily covered her mouth to hide a laugh. Ethan looked amused. "Tonight, I guess I am." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for bringing my mom's computer." "You are welcome." She was worried about it. "I noticed." Sophie smiled. "She makes the worried face a lot." Ethan glanced toward Emily. "I am beginning to hear that." Emily felt her cheeks warm. "Okay, That is enough honesty for one evening. Sophie giggled and disappeared back toward the kitchen. Ethan handed over the laptop case. Everything should be there. Emily accepted it carefully. Relief washed over her instantly. Thank you. Really, this presentation is important. I know. You know? I reviewed part of the project last week. Emily had forgotten that. Of course he knew. Ethan rarely missed details. That was one reason the company had grown so quickly under his leadership. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The hallway remained quiet except for the distant hum of an elevator somewhere in the building. Ethan glanced past her shoulder toward the apartment. His eyes moved across the modest living room, the small dining table, and the collection of children's drawings taped to one wall. There was nothing luxurious about the space. Everything looked simple, practical, and well-used. Yet something in his expression softened. Emily noticed it immediately, but could not understand why. Then Ethan's attention settled on something farther inside the apartment. His gaze stopped completely. The relaxed expression vanished from his face. He looked stunned. Emily followed his line of sight toward the refrigerator in the kitchen. A single drawing hung there beneath a magnet. Sophie had made it at school earlier that week. Ethan stared at the picture without saying a word, and for the first time since arriving, he seemed genuinely shaken. Sensing that something was wrong, Emily glanced from Ethan to the drawing on the refrigerator. It was a simple picture created with crayons and colored pencils. Sophie had drawn a small white house beside a large oak tree. A woman stood on the front porch holding the hand of a little boy. Above them, a bright yellow sun filled the corner of the page. It looked like the kind of artwork millions of children created every year. Yet Ethan continued staring at it, as though he had seen a ghost from his past. "Mr. Brooks?" Emily asked gently. Ethan blinked and quickly looked away. "Sorry." His voice sounded distant. "That drawing just caught me off guard." Before Emily could ask why, Sophie appeared again, carrying her coloring book. "Do you like it?" she asked proudly. Ethan looked back at the picture. "You made that?" Sophie nodded. "It was for school. It is very good. My teacher said the tree was her favorite part." A faint smile appeared on Ethan's face. "Your teacher has good taste." Sophie grinned. Emily noticed something unusual. The powerful executive she saw at work every day seemed completely different here. In the office, Ethan Brooks was confident, composed, and always in control. Standing in her apartment, he looked almost human in a way she had never seen before. For a moment, he seemed less like a billionaire and more like someone remembering something important. "Well," Ethan finally said, straightening his jacket, "I should probably let you both get some rest." Emily nodded. "Thank you again for bringing the laptop." "You are welcome." Sophie waved enthusiastically. "Goodbye, laptop guy." Ethan laughed. "Goodbye, Sophie." He turned toward the hallway but paused before stepping away. His eyes returned to the drawing one last time. Then he nodded slightly to himself and walked toward the elevator. Emily closed the door and stood there for several seconds. The entire evening felt strange. Sophie tugged on her sleeve. "Mom." "Yes." "Your boss is nice." Emily smiled. "He surprised me too." The next morning, life returned to normal. Emily woke before sunrise, packed lunches, helped Sophie get ready for school, and rushed into another busy workday. By 8:30, she was sitting at her desk, reviewing presentation notes. The previous night already felt distant. Then her phone buzzed. She looked down and frowned. The message came from the executive floor. Ethan Brooks was requesting her attendance at a strategy meeting later that afternoon. Emily read the message twice to make sure she understood correctly. Employees at her level were almost never invited to those meetings. Confused, she tried to focus on work. Meanwhile, several floors above, Ethan stood alone inside his office overlooking the city skyline. On his desk sat a framed photograph nearly 25 years old. Beside it was a rough sketch he had quietly drawn from memory that morning. A small white house, a large oak tree, and a picture that looked remarkably similar to the one hanging on Emily's refrigerator. As he stared at both images, one question refused to leave his mind. How could an 8-year-old girl draw a scene she should never have known existed? Emily spent the entire morning wondering why she had been invited to a strategy meeting normally reserved for senior leadership. She reviewed her presentation 3 times, checked every spreadsheet twice, and still felt unprepared. By the time the meeting began that afternoon, her nerves had settled into a steady knot in her stomach. The conference room overlooked the city skyline. Around the table sat department heads, directors, and executives whose decisions affected thousands of employees. Emily quietly took a seat near the end of the table, hoping not to draw attention to herself. Then Ethan Brooks walked in. The room immediately fell silent. He greeted everyone, reviewed the agenda, and began leading the discussion with his usual confidence. For the first 20 minutes, everything felt normal. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan asked for Emily's opinion. Not once, 3 separate times. Each question related directly to her area of expertise, but the attention still surprised her. After the meeting ended, several executives lingered behind. Emily gathered her notes as quickly as possible, eager to return to her desk. Emily. She looked up. Ethan was standing beside her chair. You did well in there. Thank you. Your suggestions were practical. I appreciate that. Ethan nodded. How is Sophie? Emily blinked. Of all the questions she expected, that was not one of them. She is doing great. Good. He seemed satisfied with the answer. Tell her I said hello. Before Emily could respond, he was already speaking with another executive. The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds, but it stayed with her for the rest of the day. Over the following weeks, similar moments began happening more often. Ethan would occasionally stop by her department. Sometimes he asked about a project. Sometimes he simply checked in. Once he brought a box of donuts to a morning team meeting and somehow remembered that Sophie loved chocolate frosting. Another time, he noticed a photograph on Emily's desk and asked if Sophie had won the school science fair. Emily found herself increasingly puzzled. He never crossed professional boundaries. He never acted inappropriate. Yet his attention felt unusually personal. One Friday afternoon, Emily received another surprise. Her phone rang just before 5 o'clock. The caller was Sophie. Mom, do not forget tonight. Emily immediately smiled. Forget what? The school art show. Emily nearly groaned. Oh no. She had completely forgotten. I am sorry, sweetheart. I am leaving right now. She rushed to finish her work, grabbed her bag, and hurried toward the elevator. When the doors opened in the lobby, she nearly collided with Ethan. Everything okay? He asked. School event. I lost track of time. Art show. Emily stared at him. How did you know that? A faint smile appeared. You mentioned it last week. Before she could answer, he stepped aside. Then you should get going. 40 minutes later, Emily arrived at the elementary school auditorium. Parents filled the room while children's artwork covered every wall. As she searched for Sophie, she suddenly stopped. Standing near one of the displays was Ethan Brooks. And beside him, excitedly explaining a drawing, was Sophie. Sophie spotted her mother first and waved enthusiastically from across the auditorium. Mom, over here. Emily walked toward them, still trying to understand what she was seeing. Ethan stood beside a display board covered with children's artwork, listening attentively as Sophie explained every detail of her drawings. He looked completely comfortable, as though attending elementary school art shows was a normal part of his schedule. You made it, Sophie said happily. Barely. Emily smiled before turning to Ethan. I did not know you would be here. Ethan glanced at Sophie. Neither did I. Sophie laughed. That is not true. Excuse me. Ethan asked. You said you might come. Emily looked between them. You two have been making plans? Not exactly, Ethan said. A few weeks ago, Sophie mentioned the event when I stopped by your department. Sophie nodded. And then he remembered. Emily found herself unexpectedly touched by that simple fact. Most people forgot things children said within minutes. Ethan had remembered something from weeks earlier. The evening passed surprisingly quickly. Sophie proudly introduced them to her teacher and showed off every project she had completed that semester. At one point, she pulled Ethan toward a display containing her latest drawing. It showed a large tree beside a small white house. Again, Emily noticed Ethan become quiet. After a moment, Sophie asked the question that had apparently been waiting in her mind for weeks. Why do you always stare at my tree pictures? Ethan looked genuinely surprised. Do I? Every time. Sophie pointed at the drawing. You get that look. What look? The thinking look. Emily almost laughed. Sophie had become remarkably skilled at reading people. Ethan studied the drawing carefully. It reminds me of somewhere. Where? Sophie asked. For the first time, Ethan seemed unsure how to answer. A place from a long time ago. Sophie accepted the explanation immediately. Children often did. Adults usually wanted details. Later that evening, after the event ended, families began heading home. As Emily helped Sophie gather her supplies, Ethan remained near the display board. His attention returned to the drawing once more. Finally, Emily walked over. "Okay," she said softly. "I have to ask." Ethan turned toward her. "Ask what? What is it about those drawings?" For a moment, he appeared to consider giving a simple answer. Instead, he exhaled slowly. "When I was 8 years old, my mother and I lived in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio." Emily listened quietly. There was a white house next to a large oak tree. He paused. "The view from our front porch looked almost exactly like this." Emily glanced at the drawing. "That cannot be common." "No." Ethan's expression grew thoughtful. "That is why it caught my attention." Before Emily could respond, Sophie ran over carrying a rolled-up poster. "Mom, can we get ice cream on the way home?" Emily laughed. "It is a school night." "That sounds like a maybe." Ethan smiled. "That sounds exactly like a maybe." Sophie grinned triumphantly. As they walked toward the parking lot together, Emily noticed something she had never seen before. Ethan was not watching the city skyline. He was not checking emails. He was not taking business calls. Instead, he was listening to an 8-year-old explain why mint chocolate chip was superior to every other flavor. And somehow, he seemed happier than he had in any boardroom. What Emily did not know was that later that night, Ethan would open an old storage box in his penthouse apartment, searching for something he had not looked at in over 20 years. Long after midnight, Ethan sat alone in his penthouse, surrounded by old cardboard boxes that had not been opened in years. Most contained forgotten trophies, photographs, and pieces of a life he rarely revisited. Growing a company from nothing had taught him to focus on the future, not the past. Yet Sophie's drawings had changed something. After nearly an hour of searching, he finally found what he had been looking for. At the bottom of a worn box sat a faded sketchbook. The cover was bent, and several pages had come loose with age. Slowly, he opened it. There, near the middle, was a drawing he had made when he was 8 years old. A white house, a large oak tree, a woman standing beside a young boy. Ethan stared at the page in silence. The similarities were impossible to ignore. The next morning, he arrived at the office earlier than usual. For the first time in years, memories followed him into work. He remembered long winters when his mother worked 2 jobs to pay rent. He remembered waiting by the front window for her to come home. Most of all, he remembered how hard she fought to create a stable life for him. The more he thought about it, the more Emily reminded him of her. She carried the same quiet determination, the same exhaustion hidden behind a smile, the same habit of putting her child first no matter the cost. Unfortunately, not everyone at Brooks Technologies viewed Emily the same way. Over the past few weeks, several employees had noticed Ethan's attention toward her department. Most ignored it. A few became curious. One person became suspicious. Richard Lawson, a senior operations director, sat across from another executive during lunch. "Have you noticed how often Emily Carter ends up around Ethan lately?" he asked casually. "A little. Interesting, is it not?" Rumors often begin with simple questions. By the end of the week, whispers had started circulating through different departments. Nobody said anything directly to Emily, but she noticed conversations stopping when she entered a room. She noticed unusual looks during meetings. She noticed people suddenly becoming distant. At first, she tried to ignore it. Then one afternoon, she overheard 2 employees speaking near the break room. "You really think that is why she keeps getting opportunities?" one asked. "What other explanation is there?" the other replied. Emily kept walking without saying a word, but the comments followed her for the rest of the day. That evening, she arrived home feeling unusually tired. Sophie immediately sensed something was wrong. "Bad day?" she asked. Emily forced a smile. "Just a long one." Sophie studied her face. "You are making the worried face again." Emily laughed softly despite herself. Some things never escaped her daughter's attention. Later that night, while helping Sophie finish homework at the kitchen table, her phone vibrated with an incoming email. The message was from Human Resources. A mandatory performance review had been scheduled for Monday morning. Emily stared at the screen. The timing felt strange. Very strange. Across town, Ethan was reviewing quarterly reports when another message appeared in his inbox. It contained an anonymous complaint regarding favoritism involving an employee named Emily Carter. As he read the accusation, his expression hardened immediately. Emily barely slept the entire weekend. Every time she closed her eyes, She replayed the whispers she had overheard at work and wondered what would happen during the performance review. By Monday morning, the knot in her stomach had grown impossible to ignore. After dropping Sophie off at school, she drove to the office in silence. The human resources meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock. At exactly 8:58, Emily walked into a conference room where two human resources representatives were already waiting. Richard Lawson sat near the far end of the table. The sight of him immediately made her uneasy. The meeting began with polite introductions and routine explanations. Then the questions started. Had she received preferential treatment from senior leadership? Had special opportunities been offered to her outside normal procedures? Had her relationship with company executives influenced project assignments? Emily stared at them in disbelief. No, she answered firmly. Absolutely not. For nearly an hour, she responded to every question with complete honesty. When the meeting finally ended, she felt exhausted. Yet the worst part was not the questioning. It was the realization that someone inside the company truly believed those rumors. Word spread quickly. By lunchtime, employees throughout the building knew that Emily had been called into human resources. Some remained supportive. Others became even more suspicious. Every glance felt heavier than before. Every conversation felt uncomfortable. Later that afternoon, Emily sat alone at her desk reviewing reports she could barely focus on. Then a message appeared on her computer screen. Ethan Brooks was requesting an immediate meeting. Her heart sank. This was it, she thought. Whatever happened next would determine her future at the company. 10 minutes later, she entered Ethan's office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Ethan stood near his desk holding a folder. His expression was serious. "Please have a seat," he said. Emily sat down quietly. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, she took a deep breath. "If this is about the rumors, I want you to know I have never used our conversations for personal advantage." Ethan looked directly at her. "I know." The certainty in his voice caught her off guard. "You do?" "I reviewed every project assignment, every performance evaluation, every recommendation attached to your name." He placed the folder on the desk. "Your work speaks for itself." Emily felt a wave of relief. "Thank you." Ethan leaned back slightly. "Unfortunately, not everyone shares that conclusion." Emily lowered her eyes. "I figured that out." "Emily." She looked up. None of this should have happened. The sincerity in his voice surprised her. Ethan rarely showed emotion at work. Today was different. "Sometimes people need someone to blame," she said quietly, "especially when they do not understand something." Ethan remained silent for a moment. Then he said something unexpected. "My mother went through the same thing." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan looked toward the city beyond the glass. She was a single mother. People judged her constantly. They assumed things about her without knowing the truth. For the first time, Emily understood why he seemed to notice things others missed. Why he remembered details about Sophie. Why he paid attention when most executives would not. Before she could respond, Ethan opened a drawer and removed an old photograph. "There is something I think you should see." Emily accepted the photograph and studied it carefully. The image had clearly aged over the years. A small white house stood beneath a massive oak tree. On the front porch was a smiling woman with one hand resting on the shoulder of a young boy. Emily's eyes widened almost immediately. "This is the same place," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. "That was my home when I was Sophie's age." Emily looked from the photograph to Ethan. "The drawings." "Exactly." He leaned forward slightly. "The first night I brought your laptop to the apartment, I saw Sophie's picture on the refrigerator and thought I was imagining things." Emily stared at the photograph again. The resemblance was undeniable. Did Sophie somehow see this picture? No. Then how could she know what it looked like? Ethan smiled faintly. "I have been asking myself the same question." For the first time in weeks, Emily felt the tension inside her begin to ease. The mystery sounded almost impossible, yet somehow it explained Ethan's unusual interest in the drawings. It had never been about favoritism. It had been about a memory, a connection he could not understand. "My mother used to tell me that some places stay with us forever," Ethan said. "Maybe that is true." Emily carefully returned the photograph. "Thank you for showing me. I wanted you to know the truth." His expression grew more serious. "And I wanted you to know that the rumors are not your fault." Emily lowered her eyes. "It still affects everyone around me." "Including Sophie?" Ethan asked gently. Emily hesitated before nodding. "Children notice more than we think." Ethan understood that immediately. He had been that child once. Later that week, the situation inside the company continued to worsen. Although no evidence supported the accusations, the rumors refused to disappear. Employees speculated. Conversations stopped when Emily entered rooms. The environment became increasingly uncomfortable. On Friday afternoon, Emily made a decision she never imagined making. She typed a resignation letter. She read it 3 times before pressing print. Her hands trembled slightly as she signed her name. The company had given her opportunities she desperately needed. Yet staying felt unfair to everyone involved. Especially Ethan. Especially Sophie. An hour later, she walked into Human Resources and submitted the letter. By the time Ethan learned what happened, Emily was already cleaning out her desk. He arrived at her department just as she placed the final family photograph into a cardboard box. "What is this?" he asked. Emily looked up. "The easiest solution. Resigning is not a solution." "Maybe not." She forced a small smile. "But it ends the conversation." Ethan shook his head. "No. It rewards the people spreading lies." "I am tired, Ethan." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emily lifted the box and headed toward the elevator. Ethan watched her leave, unable to stop her. As the elevator doors slowly closed, their eyes met one final time. Emily believed she was walking away from the most important job of her life. What she did not know was that Ethan had already made a decision of his own, and by Monday morning, the entire company would hear it. Monday morning began with confusion across Brooks Technologies. Employees arriving for work discovered a company-wide meeting had been scheduled with mandatory attendance. Nobody knew why. Speculation spread through every department. By 10 o'clock, hundreds of employees had gathered in the main auditorium while others joined through live video screens. Emily was not there. She had spent the morning updating her resume and trying not to think about everything she had lost. Sophie was at school, and the apartment felt unusually quiet. Meanwhile, Ethan stood backstage reviewing a short list of notes. Then he folded the paper and placed it aside. He did not need notes. He knew exactly what needed to be said. When he stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. Ethan thanked everyone for attending and spent a few minutes discussing company performance. Then his tone changed. "Today I want to address something more important than quarterly numbers." The audience immediately became attentive. Over the past several weeks, rumors have circulated about one of our employees. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Those rumors led to assumptions, accusations, and judgments unsupported by facts. Ethan paused. "I conducted a complete review myself. The results were clear. Emily Carter earned every opportunity she received through hard work, professionalism, and exceptional performance." A wave of murmurs moved through the room. Ethan continued. "When good people are punished because of gossip, leadership has failed. That responsibility belongs to me." The room became completely silent again. Effective immediately, policies regarding anonymous accusations and workplace conduct will be strengthened. Respect is not optional here. It is required. Then he looked directly toward the audience. "And for the record, Emily Carter submitted her resignation because of circumstances that should never have existed." Several employees lowered their eyes. Others looked genuinely uncomfortable. By lunchtime, news of the meeting had reached Emily. Her phone rang repeatedly. Messages poured in from coworkers offering apologies and support. Shortly afterward, there was a knock on her apartment door. When she opened it, Ethan stood there. This time he was not carrying a laptop. "Can we talk?" he asked. They sat at the small kitchen table while sunlight streamed through the window. Ethan explained everything that had happened during the meeting. Emily listened quietly. When he finished, neither spoke for a moment. "You did not have to do that," she finally said. "Yes," Ethan replied softly. "I did." Emily felt tears gathering in her eyes. Not because of the job, not because of the rumors, but because someone had finally stood beside her when walking away would have been easier. A few months later, Emily returned to Brooks Technologies in a newly expanded leadership role. The respect she had earned was no longer questioned. More importantly, life outside work had changed too. Ethan became a regular part of their world. School events, weekend breakfasts, science fairs, and movie nights slowly became shared traditions. Then one spring afternoon, nearly a year after the night a forgotten laptop changed everything, Sophie looked up from a park bench and asked a question that stopped both adults in their tracks. "Can I call you Dad now?" Ethan's eyes immediately filled with emotion. Emily smiled through tears of her own. For a moment, he could not speak. Then he nodded. Sophie threw her arms around him, and under the shade of a large oak tree, a family finally found the place where they belonged.